first guest, Congressman Pat Harrigan, a former Green Beret, Bronze Star recipient and one of Congress's most skeptical voices on U.S. intelligence. He's pushed back on claims that Iran was, quote, years away from nuclear weapons and stressed that Iran was dangerously close to becoming a nuclear power, enriching uranium beyond civilian levels, as they claimed, and violating agreements, ignoring IAEA warnings. Congressman Harrigan praised President Trump's strong and clear policy, offering Iran a diplomatic off-ramp while ensuring the regime never obtains nuclear arms. He warned that China, Russia, and North Korea benefit from a nuclear Iran, and that Trump's leadership is keeping America first and its troops prepared. Congressman Pat Harrigan joins us now. Congressman, thank you so much for joining us, making the time. What an important time to be standing on the right side of history, I guess.
Without a doubt, Chanel. It's always great to be with you. And certainly we are in complicated times that are very consequential. So hoping and praying that we all thread the needle here and that things can de-escalate and we can get to peace in the Middle East. But certainly, as we all know, we cannot have a nuclear-armed Iran.
No, and this is where the MAGA world seems to be splitting, or at least confused, in the sense that there's, on the one hand, the group that really wants to stay out of all of this completely, not even to provide support for Israel. And then there's the other side that says this is not the same war that we were told about when we went to, quote, war in Iraq. Very different situation. That said, I will say the other side does cogently argue that we have been on the brink of a nuclear Iran, it feels now, for 20 plus years. And they make a great point in that regard. Do we have new information now? Have you seen new information that should help us believe that this is just not another episode of Boy Cries Wolf in the Middle East yet again against another boogeyman?
Yes, and I think certainly what we have seen is that something clearly changed in the last week and a half or so with Iran's decision making, because both Netanyahu and President Trump are very much on the same page in terms of the enhanced threat. I can tell you the intelligence that I saw as of about 2.5 weeks ago. And as you said, I'm one of the most skeptical consumers of intelligence in Congress. I've been on the battlefield end of really poor U.S. intelligence, and I know what questions to ask. I know exactly where to dig. And I understand the difference in the confidence levels of the different assessments that they make. And ultimately, I wanted to set the record straight because CNN put out a report that said Iran was years away from a bomb. That's fundamentally not true. And as of 3 weeks ago, was the intelligence of the characteristics that would support attacking Iran? No, it also was not. And so within that last week and a half or so, something has clearly changed. President Netanyahu, President Trump are on the exact same page about that. That has not filtered down to us. And given that, I've taken a relatively skeptical position on the U.S. involvement beyond the support of Israel, which I think is incredibly important, not just because they're our greatest ally in the Middle East, but also because they genuinely face an existential threat with a nuclear-armed Iran. So I'm very deferential to them, but that doesn't mean that it's within our strategic interests to actually get involved, putting Americans 30,000 feet above the skies of Iran. Certainly do not think it's in our interest to put American boots on the ground. And so I think that there is a needle to thread here, given the realities and the changes that have occurred. I do not understand my Republican colleagues in Congress and in the Senate calling for regime change last night and across the primetime news hours. The warmongering, guys, we've got to stop that. We've got to be very cool and level-headed here. We need to achieve America's strategic interests, period. That's the America First agenda.
I'm so glad you brought up your experience as a consumer of U.S. intelligence. On that note, President Trump was very recently asked, why are you going forward with this kind of intelligence if even your own Director of National Intelligence, Tulsi Gabbard, was saying that the Iranian regime was not that close to a nuclear weapon, that they weren't building a nuclear weapon. And he dismissed it. He said, look, I don't care what she said. We are seeing intelligence that causes us to believe this is a reality. This isn't a game.
I have absolutely no reason to doubt President Trump, right? I have full faith and confidence. President Trump has dealt with these situations in the past incredibly well. And up until this point, I think he has really handled this situation very well, because he's very clearly putting now maximum pressure on Iran, but we have not yet committed troops into that conflict. He has offered diplomatic off-ramp after diplomatic off-ramp, and Iran has not taken it, even up to including what we're seeing coming out from their statements today. They seem to be escalating things and not de-escalating things. And so, that provides our president with very little option on how to move forward. But I do think he and I remain hopeful that there is a diplomatic off-ramp here, because if we can have access, voluntary access from Iran to dismantle their nuclear program in totality, and we can do that peacefully as opposed to actually do that kinetically, that is certainly in everybody's best interests.
And I think that's also the unsung brilliance of the way that President Trump is approaching this problem compared to the last 3-4 decades that our presidents have tried to tackle this issue, and that is by providing that off-ramp that you're mentioning. The off-ramp is with the dialogue is forced into the hands of the most powerful agent in the room, the United States. So by us staying out of it officially, the United States is providing that on paper, we are still here to talk option for Iran.
That's exactly right. And that's where I think the brilliance of President Trump's strategy has really left all options on the table. And there is an opportunity for Iran to talk. Now, I think we have to understand culturally, they're going to kind of say one thing because it's a very prideful culture.
Right.
And they can't just be seen to capitulate. That is as bad as death in that culture. And so we've got to be kind of understanding of that. And I know in the background we are. But look, I think President Trump has handled this very, very well. Iran's got to make the right decision here. And I genuinely hope that they do.
Earlier in the show, in my monologue, I was taking issue with the fact that so many, rightfully afraid isolationists are out there. They're part of the so-called MAGA community. And they're out there saying this just feels like Bush 2.0. This feels like Iraq War 2.0. And I laid out that there were clear differences here. I mean, this is not the Saddam Hussein regime. I mean, the Saddam Hussein cast of characters in Iraq was a completely different scenario from Iran. So it feels to me dangerously simplistic to equate Khomeini in Iran with Saddam Hussein in Iraq, and then the attached motivations that were connected to President Bush, Cheney at the time. I mean, they were clearly motivated by some psychological issues and bank account issues. I don't see those same factors in play now, and I think that that rift within the MAGA community is quite dangerous, if not downright ignorant.
I think that all foreign policy is unfortunately always distilled down to dangerous simplicities. And the reality is this is incredibly complicated. There's no question about it, right? As we are moving all of these resources over into the Middle East, you know who's probably pretty scared right now? Taiwan. When you start thinking about the layering of how does our interaction in the Middle East actually impact what's going on in the Russian-Ukrainian conflict, what could happen between China and Taiwan with our change in force posture, the potential expenditure of a significant amount of our military materiel that we cannot replace very quickly, as we have seen over the last 3 years of conflicts proliferated across the globe. What are the second and third order consequences of actually putting a serious American fingerprint on the fight in Iran, not just supporting Israel, not just taking a defensive posture, not just selling them weapons, but actually participating in that conflict? Those are very dynamic consequences. And I think from my perspective, Where I have frustration over what I've seen in the last couple days is that we seem to have many folks, particularly senior leaders in the House and the Senate, folks who have been around for a long time, that seemingly, let's just teleport ourselves 7 days back in the past. We were not talking about Iran as our greatest strategic threat. We were talking about China as our greatest strategic threat. We were talking about how we bifurcate the relationship between Russia and China and prevent them from massing military effects around the globe, simultaneously working together in a way that we can't deal with. And now all of a sudden, 6 days later, we're talking about regime change in Iran. And that's what we need to do in order to respond to the greatest threat that we now have as Americans. I'm sorry, I think that's dangerously simplistic. And we have to understand the second and third order consequences of what we may or may not decide to do in Iran.
I often take issue when people in D.C. say things like it's much more complicated than that. And I think that applies domestically. I think you're absolutely right. When it comes to foreign policy, yes, we're talking about actually many, many layers, including cultural layers, geographical and historical ones. So, yeah, I normally will take issue with politicians who say that, but I think in this case this is applicable. Well, the issue that so many of your colleagues and those inside the MAGA movement are concerned about, of course, is that regime change narrative. And so you're saying that there is a way to go about this without actually engaging in the regime change that we all hate and fear and have come to realize are just endless money holes.
It's not only an endless money hole that has cost the United States trillions of dollars over the past 25 years, it has also cost us thousands of lives, an unbelievable amount of American blood. And if we've learned anything from the last 25 years of the global war on terror, the color revolutions that we sponsored, any example of foreign intervention that we have taken in the last 2.5 decades has been completely and fundamentally unsuccessful. Why we would think that that would be a great idea, why we should rush into regime change makes absolutely no sense to me. When the reality is, let's just take and distill down what we actually need to accomplish here in Iran is we need to change the decision-making of Iranian political leadership. Now, I'll be the first to tell you that might not be possible, because the enemy gets a vote. And with all of these off-ramps that President Trump has provided and with the escalatory talk that Iran has responded with, as opposed to wanting to come to terms, wanting to have diplomatic relations to resolve this, it may not be possible. But we should definitely try all the way up till the proverbial settlement on the courthouse steps before trial, if you will. We should be open to that. We should pursue that because it is absolutely in the United States' strategic interest to accomplish this peacefully if we can.
Going back to an earlier topic about the intelligence community, and in this core issue, we still have, it's so hard to trust a community that has betrayed us for so long. What do they have to do right now to rebuild trust at this moment with members like yourself, with people who have been consumers of the intelligence behind the scenes?
I don't know that you should ever trust, right? I think that that is actually part of the problem. We should always be very open to questioning assumptions and assertions that are made where you don't have 100% clarity. I mean, that is the purpose of intelligence. The entire purpose is to give the decision-making apparatus and authorities of this country the best information by which to make a decision. But very clearly throughout the recent history of this country, that intelligence has been flawed. I've seen it personally in my missions where I thought that there was going to be X number of people and there were 10X number of folks that I had to contend with on the enemy side. And that creates a very different environment than what you think you're moving into. And so I think we should always be skeptical. We should certainly be respectful. We have an amazing intelligence community that really does have some unbelievably incredible capabilities, but we have to have leaders in Congress who understand the limitations and constraints of those capabilities and can focus those to get the most accurate picture by which to make decisions.
Well, I say the silliest for last. Real quick, what are your thoughts on the Tucker Carlson, Senator Ted Cruz conversation? Lots of gotcha moments from Tucker, and lots of pushback from Ted Cruz. What did you think of that interaction?
I'll be honest, I can't wait to watch it. I saw some of the clips from last night, and I was like, man, this is going to be really interesting. And, I've got great respect for both of those individuals. I've got concerns for where I've seen some of them and their thought leadership move to in the last 6 months or so. But I consider both of them to be great resources for the American people. And ultimately, look, we have to decide what our baseline truth is. We have to discern what the right path is here. And at the end of the day, I can't think of having a more perfect leader at the helm during this crisis than President Trump, to have that wisdom and discernment on how to make the best call for the future of the United States of America. Because as we all know, we all have different opinions, we have different perspectives, but the commander-in-chief is there, and he's ready to make a call here. And at the end of the day, we're all Americans. We got to support whatever the decision is that President Trump makes. And at that point in time, it's all about winning, and we'll see where we go.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I love that we have two titans of debate actually going at it, and that's the magic and beauty of where we are in America and free speech. So love seeing that. I think the side benefit is I think most of us now know exactly how many people live in Iran. Whether that changes anything about how we treat the situation, I don't know. But Congressman, thank you very much for the time. We appreciate it.
Thanks, Chanel. Always great to be with you.
Stay tuned. CNN is on thin ice going into the summer, reported as a declining asset for its parent company, Warner Brothers Discovery. Is this an end of an era? MRC's Tim Graham weighs in. We'll be right back.